So I want to welcome all of you to the Inclusive Democracy Learning webinar. I am Luisa Jardim. I am a program associate at People Powered. I'm based in Brazil, and I'll be facilitating the webinar today. So this webinar is a part of a series of webinars that we are having in partnership with other organizations. So we are People Powered, Trust, Accountability, and Inclusion Collaborative, which is TAI, and the Open Government Partnership, OGP. So we are doing these webinars together. I know that more people join, so if you do want to change the language, please, we're having interpretation for this in Portuguese, Spanish, French, and English. So every time that you need to switch between interpretations, you can use the button to do that. And you can also slide to change the setting if you do want to hear the original audio or if you just want to hear the interpretation. So this is a series of webinars. We are now in the second webinar, which is Inclusive Democracy. You can see that we will have more too, one on later this month and the other one in the beginning of July. So you can also join those other webinars as well. And throughout the entire time, you can present yourself in the chat, and you can also ask questions. So if you do ask those questions in English, Spanish, French, or Portuguese, we'll be able to answer them, to translate them and answer them. So feel free to use the chat and ask questions during the webinar. And at the end, we will have a Q&A session, so a session for questions and answers. And we will have also breakout rooms for you to interact with participants. So moving a bit. So as I mentioned, we are doing this event in collaboration with our partners. So People Powered, I work at People Powered. We are a global hub for participatory democracy, and we are doing this with Open Government Partnership and also with Trust, Accountability, and Inclusion Collaborative, TAI. So all the 4 events are being held by these 3 organizations. So we are very happy to have you here. And just going through the agenda of the webinar. So during this webinar, we will cover the following topics. So why we are working on inclusion, examples of challenges and strategies to work with inclusion, how do we support change at a larger scale. We will have a session for questions and answers, and we will share in the end some calls to actions and next steps. Also, so when we reach 1 hour from the start of the webinar, we will have additional 30 minutes breakout rooms that you can choose which room you want to join to engage with the speakers. So it's kind of like the moment at the end of an in-person event that you go to the front and you reach out to the panelists that you wanted to ask more questions. So we can do that in those breakout rooms at the end. So ask your questions in the chat during the webinar, and also at the end you have this breakout room moment. So introducing our speakers, we have with us today Blair. I'm not going to say last names for all of you because this will be challenging for me, okay? So I'm just going to say the first names for everyone. So we have Blair. Blair is the co-CEO of the Accountability Lab and is based in the US. We have Elisa, Director of Civitates, based in France. We have Enrique. Enrique is the Senior Program Officer at the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, based in the US. We have Frank, the Executive Director at Green Governance Zimbabwe, at Zimbabwe Trust, based in Zimbabwe. We have Maria, Social Connection Coordinator at Olin, based in Mexico. We have Miren, the Director of Open Government OGP in the Basque Country, and I'll be facilitating this discussion today. So, why are we working on inclusion? So to start this conversation with all these amazing people that I just introduced to you, and also everyone who's watching, I would first propose a reflection for all of us. So why are we working on inclusion? At People Powered, we come from a background of working with participatory democracy. So participatory and deliberative democracy, they are often viewed as tools to complement representative democracy by empowering people to collaborate with government in decision-making processes that can affect their lives. So in practice, what we want to ask is, are these approaches really shifting power and engaging broader communities in decision-making, or are just the same people participating in all those initiatives that we have? So I want all of us to reflect on the processes that we have worked on, the processes that we want to build, to start implementing, and answer this question. Which groups do you think it's more difficult for you to engage in participatory or deliberative programs. So you can share your answers in the chat. And also if you want to share like, hi, I'm from this country, and for me, this group is very hard to engage. I think context also is very related to this. So I'm going to read some answers. So we have young people, people that are under 20 or people that are over 60. We have indigenous people. We have immigrants that are hard to engage. Traditional communities, so connected to indigenous persons. Gen Z, which is people born after 97, I don't know. Refugees, literate populations, poor people. So we do have many different marginalized groups that are hard to engage. And before I introduce the participants to share how they are engaging these different communities, I wanted to introduce you to a project that we have worked on at People Powered to address inclusion. So the problem that we faced is organizations and governments frequently struggle to engage marginalized communities. So even when we have efforts like sortition to ensure representative participation, there are other barriers, structural barriers that, such as power dynamics, such as contextual factors that persist. So we cannot overcome these barriers, and we cannot be in a place where people actually participate equally. So this is a problem, and addressing a challenge like this requires, this is something that we learned with this project. It requires a fundamental shift in process design to make it inclusive by default. So it's not designing a process and reaching to a point in the end when we're going to reflect, okay, how can we include more people? But it's actually designing processes that from the beginning, they are inclusive. So this is why 2 years ago, we started a project called Build Inclusive Democracy with 13 organizations from 3 global regions. So this project was only possible because of the engagement of those 13 organizations and the support we received from the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, that you saw. We have Enrique here, who will be talking later. So we got together for this project 2 years ago, and the goal of the project was to build the capacity of these organizations, of the organizations that were participating, and the broader audience to make participatory democracy more inclusive of marginalized communities. In order to do that, we focused on 3 marginalized groups, which are women, youth, and displaced people. So I saw some of you commenting about youth, about immigrants, so can be considered displaced people, also women. So we focused on those 3 marginalized groups. What we did during these 2 years was a series of workshops, meetings, in-person convenings, research, etc., to discuss the key barriers that prevent the participation of these groups, and also potential strategies for include these groups in participatory and deliberative processes. Building on those discussions that we had over the course of those 2 years, we have developed 4 online courses on inclusion of marginalized groups, which we want to launch today. So all of you can access those courses for free. They are online and self-paced courses. So we have 4 courses: how to engage marginalized groups in participatory programs, how to engage displaced people in participatory programs, how to engage youth, and also how to engage women in participatory programs. Each of these 4 courses cover the importance of including that group, the key barriers that prevent their participation, strategies for inclusion, and best practices that you can learn from. The courses are also very interactive, so there are discussion forums for you to share your views, and also the challenge that you have in your context, and learn from other people that are also taking the courses. So as we mentioned, the courses are officially launched now, so you can access them and share them with your network, with who you think might be interested. But we will reinforce this again at the end of the webinar. So right now you can stay with us and listen to the participants, and then at the end we'll share the courses again. So in order to bring this webinar some practical examples of how inclusion is moving from challenge to act in different contexts, we are going to take a closer look at the challenges and strategies for including a few specific communities. So we're going to focus on youth, elderly, and women. So the first round of speakers, they will share some examples of what this looks like in practice. But before I pass it to Frank, I just wanted to reinforce to you that we have interpretation for this event. So if you do want to change, you can find it at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can change to Portuguese, French, or Spanish. Frank will be speaking English, but the other two people that are going to present now, right after Frank, they're going to be speaking Spanish. So even if you're comfortable with English now, when they start speaking Spanish, you have to click on the interpretation button and choose the English option so you can hear the interpretation, okay? So Frank, I wanted to start with you. I want to invite you to introduce yourself and also present the challenge you faced and the strategy you used to tackle this challenge. So the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Louisa. It's my pleasure to be the first speaker of this event. And I take pleasure in the relationship that I had with People Power. Yeah, so without wasting much time, I think the issue of youth inclusion in participatory democracy, it's still a contentious issue and problematic too, even after years of advocacy and lobbying to ensure that young people have got space and opportunities to participate when, decision-making processes on so many issues is concerned. And you would realize that the barriers that has been alluded to already by Louisa has got certain forms and variables, which could be cultural, institutional, or even systematic. But I won't be theoretical about it. I'll go straight to our action. So a Green Governance Zimbabwe Trust is a public interest institution, which I founded in 2019 for the purposes of ensuring that young people participate in climate change and natural resource governance processes, not only as, participants, but also as influencers. This came as a result of the blurred, representation of young people when it came to climate change response. After the cyclone Idai of 2019, which happened in Southern Africa and affected Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and of course in Malawi, Madagascar. So what we realized during that time was that although there were so many efforts by various actors, including government, private sector, and even humanitarian organizations to rescue the situation when it came to the climate event, the severe climate event that had happened that time. Decisions were not involving or including young people's choices and young people's preferences in their various forms, by the way, because we young people are also not a homogeneous group. We also, for instance, have young women within that youth demographic. So this is the challenge that we realized and that we observed as an institution. But secondly, for us to influence certain choices, such as distribution of humanitarian aid or priorities of what would young people would need in a severe climate event, this needed for us to influence the involvement of youth in leadership position. So this came out as well as a challenge to say, we do not have young people within leadership positions as an avenue to influence how climate responses are being done or were being done during that time. And it was a marked an absence of youth leadership within positions. In any case, you would realize that more young people would be relegated to assist in what we would call menial tasks, of lifting old women from one place to the other, or distributing humanitarian aid, be it food, clothing, or other equipment. Whereas we felt that having youths in the leadership positions within that community of Chimanimani in Zimbabwe was one thing that was going to make the situation better and improve not only their representation, but also the extent to which their concerns are addressed. But also thirdly, the lack of youth representation in policy formulation and implementation is one thing that also, it came to the surface. It's one thing that emerged during this critical moment. So as you can see from that picture there, we have got a group of people that are discussing, and mostly these are older women and men that are talking about climate change policy formulation and implementation. But we do not see young people there. And these are the three main challenges that I'll talk about right now. But moving on to the next slide, the idea now was that what methodology can we use to ensure that young people's voices are taken into consideration. And of course, we have used other methods, which are, I would say, old-fashioned methods, where probably would just sit in a room with the duty bearers and senior politicians and discuss certain issues. But this time around, we managed to use the legislative theater approach. So the legislative theater approach is a method that we got to be introduced through the People Powered program, which I was part of, and which I will talk about, of course, during the next few minutes or hours that we're going to be together. But just shortly, the legislative theater allows for young people to develop performances through theater, and in order to disseminate issues that they are facing. So this was also at a time where the Chimanimani Rural District Council developed a watershed and a climate change and watershed policy, which was not youth inclusive at all. So the legislative theater gave us an opportunity to put together young people and duty bearers to interact through using that method of theater, and also promoting engagement between these two groups of people. So I would say loosely, in a funny way or in a more interactive and in a less serious manner, the legislative theater approach managed to assist or to bridge the gap that existed between young people and duty bearers. And you can see from that picture there, where we were preparing, the legislative theater. So it was not only, just preparing a play, but during the preparation of the play, interactions already started happening, and questions already started coming out and being answered in a more friendly and in a more conducive manner, where we are not pointing fingers at each other. And this is where we are today, a year later, where if you go to the next slide, you see that young people can now actually talk to duty bearers, even within parliamentary spaces. So this took us in a long time, about a year and a half, for us to start, developing a method which we, believed would actually be more conducive in an environment where, young people are not viewed as an important actor or player in policy making, as well as policy implementation processes. To a place where dialogue actually started happening between these two groups of people. And thirdly, to a place where young people are actually invited within the House of Representatives, within the parliament itself, to actually participate in consultative processes around climate change and natural resource governance issues. But also, as you can see, the young people actually directly influencing policy through parliamentary submissions, as you can see. Yeah, so I think this will be my introduction of what we've done during the past 1.5 years through this partnership that we had People Powered, and I'm happy to be able to flesh out more about how this method actually works. So thank you, Louisa, and I'll stop for now.
Thank you so much, Frank. I loved how you shared that you chose a participatory method that you found it was engaging for that specific group, so allowing them to express themselves in a fun and interactive way. So it got me to reflect how it's not about trying, if you want to include more people, it's not about trying to include them in one method that you already have that was excluding them before. So you have to try to find ways from the beginning to create a process that is suitable for that group. So I thought that was really nice. And I loved seeing the pictures and how people were like actually concentrated and like really engaged in the activity. So thank you so much for sharing this with all of us. So now I want to invite Miriam from the Basque country to share her experience. So Miriam, I would also ask you to please present yourself and then the challenges and strategies for inclusion of the specific group. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luisa. I'm going to talk a little bit about the elder people and how we try to look for a solution of an issue, because we have an aging society, and we have also a digitalizing society. So this is a big problem. And we have different situations, yes, in which we have a huge gap between them. So from this situation, and as an open government director at the government of the Basque country, I've been working with other administrations in a project which is a unique project within OGP, which is the inter-administrative government and project. So what we do is to give some social services, because we have different administrations to give answer to these social services. So in OGP Local Euskadi, we work with different administrations of different levels. For example, the Basque government, the provinces, and also municipalities, together with the social civil society, in order to give different models to answer to the needs of different people. And we work as a cooperative with the co-design. We analyze the problem together. We are going to think about the design and the process and the follow-up of this project. And we are going to evaluate the project all together. One of the topics that is very important when we think about the second action plan is that we had to look for different situations, social situations, in which all administrations were involved or affected by. So in this roundtable for in order to discuss and deliberate with different stakeholders, so we had this elderly commission, and we had different associations for elderly people in different regions. They were talking about different situations, and all of us knew that we needed to give satisfaction, we needed to give answers to this aging population, because once they get to the 60 years old, they don't have projects. So we needed to answer to these kind of projects in their own language, taking into account their own situation, which were the projects that we could actually help them to have, because the different administrations should give different answers. They needed to know where to go with exactly, especially thinking about where they live, which were their personal situations, their own age. So we were analyzing the different perspectives from their own language and making them participants of these projects. So this was a kind of analysis that was done in this commission. And what we did was to answer with different methodologies that we were working on OGP. And we also united part of these actions, and we had a commission of elders or aging population. So we have a Stainu Basque, which is the innovation commission of the Basque country, which is also part of OGP and Euskadi. And we have a co-designed and the deployment and the citizen evaluation between all these stakeholders. And we were taking into account all the different levels, administrative levels. We see the Basque government, but also we have other institutions, Vizcaya and Álava. These are different municipalities and provinces that are parts of these administrations and this commission. We were dividing the task and thinking about the different needs. And in this way, we were answering these challenges for this aging population, and the elderly started seeing the different progresses that we done. And we can also see that the way in which the project was achieved or done in the different stages, and they were part of the solution as well. This is another action plan, which was within schools. And one of the challenges was to finish this digital gap and to empower citizenship, because they really needed to bridge this gap and to design the different apps in order to generate, in order not to generate new gaps.
No, thank you so much, Miriam, for your participation and contribution. I think we will have more time during the breakout rooms for you to talk more about those two cases, but I think it's brilliant how you mentioned how it was important to have the commissions and the groups of elderly people participating from the design, so they could be the ones to say like, oh, this is not suitable for us, here there's a problem of language, and they could guide the way the process was being designed, because they know exactly how to engage their own group, the group they're part of. So I think that's amazing. Thank you for sharing this. And now we will hear from Maria. Maria from that works at Olin from Mexico. She couldn't be here today, but we have recorded a video with her to share her experience, and we are going to play that video now.
So we are very helpful and thankful for these municipalities to have opened their doors and work together. One of these is Antanazuacatlan, which is a community in the municipality of Acachatlán in the state of Hidalgo, Mexico. This municipality is predominantly indigenous, and the community of Santana Tacuala is governed by traditional customs and practices. This is important because the presence of men in decision-making positions is very important, and the community has a strong sense of respect towards these local authorities, their community authorities, which is a body of officials called delegates. And the delegates are responsible for making the most important decisions within the community. As we are an organization made up of women and young women, it was very challenging to convince this power structure of the community to work with us. But it's important to mention that there is a lot of disillusionment in the community towards democratic mechanism. Why? Because they have this sense that politics is useless, that democratic processes don't work, that nothing is achieved in reality. So we worked on the participatory budgeting mechanism with them, and it was a huge effort to convince them that at the end of the project, they would have certain projects that could be materialized in their communities. We build this relationship of trust with the delegates and community through constant work. There was no other way to convince them of our seriousness but making consecutive visits on the community so they could get to know us progressively. For us, working in the women and community was also a challenge, because this community is also the only challenges for them are related to taking care of the family. So in any activity we invited them, we faced the barrier that they had to ask permission for some higher family structure in order to be able to participate with us. Fortunately, since we had already worked on this sense of trust with the community, women also trusted us and started participating in our activities, regardless of their family structure and their customs they were used to. Fortunately, this allowed us to have the participation of wonderful women with whom we established a very close relationship, even friendship with some of them, so they could participate in our projects. In the participatory budgeting project, we had the participation of 2 women in particular who won the projects of this participatory budget. And in this pilot, we had 3 winning projects, 2 of which were presented by women. The first was the construction of a park that is called Sakwali by Mrs. Soraya, and the second one was the reforestation of parts of the community, and this project was presented by a minor girl. The participation of these women and the all women who participated in the design of the project was very important for us and for the community as well, because thanks to this participation, the population began to realize that all ideas were valuable, not only ideas from the authority or from men, but also recovering all the voices from women and especially from young people. The participation of all women who participated in these projects sparked certain processes within the population, to the extent that current the community of Santana Sacuala has its first female delegate, who is a very important figure in this local authority body, which decides many important issues within the community. Remember that in populations with these structures, all decisions go through this body of delegates, who have the final saying in the different processes, not only in democratic, but also in basic and very nascent matters within population.
It was great to have this participation of Maria, even with the recorded video. And it's a very good example for us to see the importance of understanding the context and also how to work with intersectionality. So working with women, working with indigenous groups, and also working with youth. So it was a very good example to see all of this. So yeah, I want to thank the 3 of you, Frank, Miriam, and Maria, for those insightful lessons. I always think it's so important to listen to other people's challenges, so we can better understand the complexity of inclusion, but also see that we are not alone. Like we have people that struggle with the same things as we do. So thank you all for sharing. And now I wanted to, based on this discussion, I want to lead us to another level of reflection and more discussions. So how should we invest our time and resources to make democracy more inclusive? And how should funders and organizations support inclusion work in ways that lead to longer-term, more systemic change? So in order to address these questions, we will have the second round of participants. And I wanted to start with Blair. So Blair, can you please introduce yourself and also talk about your work at Accountability Lab and how we can support inclusion at a larger scale, please?
Thank you, and hi everyone. I'll be brief because I'd love us to have as much conversation as possible. Touching briefly on my work at the Accountability Lab, I'd like to pick up on a point there made toward the end by Maria about trust. And I think so much of participatory and inclusive democracy and governance needs to be about building trust. I think Daniel also put a comment in the chat about suspicion of some of these kinds of processes. And I think part of that comes from the fact that many of them have been extractive in the past. We collectively, as organizations that are trying to gather inputs, often take that information and don't create the feedback loops that are needed to more meaningfully engage people over time. So building those feedback loops is critical. We've been doing that at the Accountability Lab through something called civic action teams, which are groups of volunteers in communities that gather that information, work with power holders of different kinds to solve problems based on that information. These teams started in Nepal after the earthquakes there in 2015 and have now spread around the world and have become a platform for these kinds of approaches. One example I wanted to touch on very briefly is in Liberia, where our teams have been doing this in gold mining concession communities, including with gold mining companies, to make sure that they are following through on the responsibilities that they have in those communities, in ways that have led to all sorts of really meaningful changes for those communities, because they've really focused on these feedback loops. A second piece of this is trust comes through continuous engagement. As we all know, we need to say what we're going to do, we need to do it, and then we need to say that we've done it in a variety of different ways. So much of the exclusion that we're talking about is that dichotomy between people who are online and offline. And I think the more we can combine approaches that are both online and offline, that are virtual, hybrid, but also asynchronous, so that people can engage in a way and at a time that suits them, is essential. And then the third point picks up on something that Frank touched on, the legislative theatre, which is amazing. It's about making this fun. We have to make these processes engaging for people and meet them where they are, in order to ensure that they participate fully. So that means things like theatre, it means film, it means music. How can we bring people in using mediums that they understand and that they appreciate, in order to have conversations and to participate in ways that are inclusive? In Zimbabwe, we also run something called the RAP report, which is raps about local issues, local news, that's on TV and on social media, and can begin to connect, particularly with young people, in ways that they understand. If we move to the next slide, with my OGP co-chair hat on, I'm also privileged to be the civil society co-chair of OGP this year with the government of Kenya. I wanted to touch on a couple of issues. One is this idea that there are different levels of participation, of course, from the very local to the national to the international. I loved Miran's point about how she, even at the subnational level, is working across different institutions and different levels to connect the dots and coordinate around policy change. And that's exactly the kind of thing that OGP is so good at doing as a framework. It allows civil society to coordinate with government and across government agencies to develop coherent approaches to inclusion. And many OGP multi-stakeholder fora, I'm sure many of you listening are part of these, include very, very diverse groups. Inclusion is a real priority for OGP because it's so essential to ensuring that public policy is sustainable over time and is effective. Kenya, for example, who is co-chairing OGP this year, has developed a commitment around safe and responsible digital transformation, which includes establishing a coordination mechanism that is multi-stakeholder, inclusive and independent from government, to really bring in a variety of different voices to shape digital policy and governance of emerging technology like AI. And so there are some really interesting examples of this happening through OGP. And OGP has a challenge currently, which I would encourage all of you to look at. We can put the link in the chat, to generate new ambitious commitments outside of action plans, to really try and drive forward progress on some key critical issues that relate to many of the themes that we're talking about today. Two very final points I'd like to make about kind of things I think we could do better. One is connecting all of this to movements. I think there's a lot of energy in people's movements around the world, of the kind that we all know about, around climate, around labor rights, around safety and security issues, but I'm not sure some of our participatory processes are quite connected to some of that energy in ways that would channel it in ways that would make it most effective. And the final point is thinking about how we measure all of this, and not just how we measure it, what the indicators are, but making sure that institutions are centering those indicators in everything they do. We've been involved, for example, with the World Bank about how they are integrating citizen engagement into everything they do, and the reform of multilateral development banks. And we haven't got to where we need to go yet. I think there's a lot to do to make sure that global institutions understand these issues, and that the very local, incredible voices that we're hearing from are meaningfully engaged and included in the kinds of decisions that they make. let me leave it there. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Blair. I loved that you said meet people where they are. I think that's like the, the key lesson we need to have with building inclusive processes, but I also like the idea of the interconnection between the levels with movement. And I want to return to this point on measurement. We'll find time because I know that other people asked it in the questions and answers. So we will find time for that. So now, Elisa, I wanted to invite you to also please introduce yourself and Civitatis. And what is your experience to answer this question?
Thank you, Luisa, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So Civitatis is a donor pooled fund with about 20 foundation partners that pool their funding together to support democracy in Europe. And we do that through grant making, capacity, and field building. And two principles guide our grant-making approach to defend and to promote inclusive, open, just democratic societies. The first one is collective action. So I think many of the speakers have alluded to it. You can't do this alone, and the trends are worrying. So for us, looking at Europe, civic space has deteriorated in 12 EU member states just in the past 6 years, according to the Civicus Monitor. And what we're seeing is that a lot of that closing civic space is around protest, the right to protest, and the right to protest, including for marginalized communities. So what Civitatis does is that we support collective action, people from different walks of life coming together, broad coalitions that fight against that closing space. The second principle is system change. So as a donor, we are committed to addressing the root causes of democratic decline, including inequality and exclusion. And recent research done by Philea, with the Association of European Philanthropic Foundations, shows that a lot of the threats to democracy, whether it's populism, political polarization, anti-immigrant discourse, are actually just symptoms of deeper systemic failures and unmet needs, including socioeconomic inequalities, social exclusion, deteriorating electoral integrity, diminishing public participation. So at Civitatis, we support organizations that address those root causes through building bridges and broad coalitions within civil society and adopting inclusive intersectional approaches and strategies to our grant making. So the coalitions we support bring together a diverse range of organizations working on issues ranging from human rights, anti-racism, gender justice, economic justice, environmental and climate justice, for instance. So how do we support change at a larger scale? Three things. So we recognize that closed democratic space is a root cause of closed civic space. And we support civil society groups representing marginalized communities to play, for instance, lead roles in participatory and deliberative democracy programs, such as citizens' assemblies. As Maria said, many marginalized groups have lost trust in the ability of representative democracy to deliver and to respond to their needs, to their aspirations, but they're often more inclined to trust and engage in participatory processes at local level where their voices can be heard along others. We also help civil society groups from marginalized communities to play a strong role to influence policies that affect them. So someone asked a question in the chat, what do we mean by inclusive democracies or inclusive processes? To me, it's the ability of everyone to affect decisions and policies that affect their daily lives. And often, marginalized communities are just not involved in those processes. So one of the things we're doing in our technology and democracy portfolio at Civitatis is to ensure that we fund organizations that are not necessarily experts on tech and big tech, but which are on the receiving end of how tech and artificial intelligence exacerbates existing inequalities and reinforces discrimination. So in our tech portfolio, we don't just fund NGOs with tech expertise, but also groups who work on social justice, so that we can strengthen their capacity to engage on tech legislation and tech policy. Another point I wanted to make is that inclusion is intrinsically political. So speaking from a philanthropic foundation, inclusive democracy involves the redistribution of power and resources to groups that have been historically marginalized and underrepresented. And this redistribution is inherently political because it challenges existing power structures and vested interests. And so in a way, we need to have new people in position of power so that they can create more inclusive democracy programs. Now, not all donors are going to be comfortable with that, but some are taking and testing new approaches. And I want to quote here the work of our good friends at Multitudes Foundation, which supports political change makers in Europe and provides them with financial resources, strategic advice, practical support, and a community of practice to advance their mission to reimagine politics in support of a more diverse representation. And so they fund individuals to run for office, and they support candidates from minority backgrounds, so including women, people from ethnic minorities, LGBTQ plus individuals, people representing or coming from diasporas, people with disabilities. And that's still, to my knowledge, one of the only foundations out there who's openly has a political agenda around representation and inclusion. And then last but not least, I think, again, from a donor perspective, I think there are practices that the donor community can adopt to lower barriers to entry and provide long-term support to organizations representing marginalized communities. So, for instance, I think a best practice is to provide core multi-year unrestricted support to support the agency of those groups and their ability to build their capacity over the long run. Inclusion is not a 2-year project. It's more a 10-year, multi-year grant that will be effective. Another thing that I want to flag as a best practice is, and Civitates has that commitment to open calls, and that's a way to not fund only the usual suspects, those larger NGOs that are known in the donor community, but open calls are a great way to find and invite other organizations to present their work to the donor community. Language justice is also something that we're looking at Civitates, making sure that our application forms are or that our application systems are open to different types of language, having easy reporting formats, or having calls instead of written reports, again, to lower the barrier to entry of groups who don't necessarily master English or are able to type. And then last but not least, I want to reinforce what Blair said about funding movement or funding individuals. Often donors shy away from funding movements and individuals because they're not registered, they don't have nonprofit status. But I think especially when we talk about inclusion, that's really, really important. So I'll leave it here, and I really look forward to the conversation and the discussion later. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Elisa. Yeah, we will have more time for discussion in the breakout rooms. I just wanted to thank you for touching on some very important points and also to bringing us this reality about funding, which I think it's interesting for many people that are here. And I wanted to invite Enrique to please introduce yourself and also share your experience, and then we'll move to next steps.
Thank you, Lisa, very much. As you know, my name is Enrique Bravo Escobar. I'm a senior program officer at the National Endowment for Democracy in the US. For those of you who don't know us, the National Endowment for Democracy is a publicly funded private foundation that seeks to strengthen democratic institutions and human rights protection with a focus on the global majority world. Through our worldwide grants program, the endowment assists those who are working to build democratic institutions and spread democratic values. And, we can switch to the next slide so that we take good advantage of the little time that we have. So I want to start here and sort of like Elisa mentioned, democratic practices and global freedom around the world are in decline. We've seen this decline every year for almost 2 decades. Every index shows that freedom in the world, VDEM, everybody has pointed that out. We are seeing a widespread problems with elections, including violence, manipulation, armed conflicts, the denial of political rights and civil liberties, the rejection of pluralism, and of course, constant attacks against the free press, which is all in the rise. So adding to all of this, there's a global harmful increase in political polarization. In other words, for those of us who are working on democratic strengthening, the house is on fire. So how do we get here? There's many reasons on how we got here. We don't have time to go through all of them now, but I am convinced that a critical factor in this global decline of support for democracy and the rise of authoritarianism is the growing frustration of citizens with its elected officials. And this citizen disillusionment with democracy can be mitigated with more effective citizen participation in the public sphere and producing more responsive governments. And like Blair said, this engagement, when it's effective and meaningful, also helps to build much needed trust in the system. So I think we have, a shared view on all of this. So because we are concerned with this phenomena, the endowment, particularly the global program that I work in, has designed a strategy that prioritizes support for democratic innovations that seek to strengthen effective and meaningful citizen participation in democratic governance beyond elections. Now, these are not new concerns. The need to find effective responses has become imperative for democratic sustainability. We think that countries facing democratic decline or erosion, but those also that are in an upward trend of democratic adoption, can find participatory and deliberative democracy approaches as a strategic way to reinvigorate democracy and produce some of the antibodies that can help democracies overcome autocratic temptations. And definitely to make democracy stronger, they need to be more inclusive. And I think I agree with Elisa that not all donors are necessarily convinced or comfortable or thinking really about this. So one thing we need to do is to connect these priorities to avoid the perception that the work on inclusivity is a luxury under the current circumstances. And if you can go, Lisa, just one step back to the cartoon, this is why I really like this cartoon, because when the house is on fire, we don't want inclusivity to be seen as the empty card boxes that are inside in case we need them one day. We need to be able to make and tell a story that makes it a fundamental component of addressing this crisis and this house on fire, right? So we can go back to the other slide, please. So how should we do this? I think from a donor perspective, I have 3 quick ideas to just share with you guys. One is we have to tell better stories. We have to be better at explaining why we do what we do, and we need to explain what we have done and what the result was. We have to be able to explain to the world at large, of course, but to the donor community in particular, what are the results that we can observe from the growing evidence of the use of participatory and inclusive democracy approaches. So this is a key factor. We need to tell better stories. The second one, I put it here as find multipliers, and I think this is very much following Blair's point. No, I mean, we need to figure out ways to shift the practices of larger institutions that are implementing all sort of governance approaches, including, of course, organizations like the World Bank and other development institutions who can include participatory and inclusive approaches in the way they operate and implement projects. So that's one good way to think about it from a global perspective. We need to find some of those multipliers. And last but not least, we have to seize those windows of opportunity and engage willing counterparts in government. Participatory and democracy and deliberative democracy approaches that have a focus on being inclusive can really produce the right results. But we need to work with government counterparts to actually reap the benefits of these approaches. And while some of these practices are more common in, let's say, the European context, they are less familiar in the global majority world. So we have to start building the right arguments, the right stories, and find the right partners to seize those opportunities. I'll leave it at that just for the sake of time, and happy to discuss further, of course, as we go on in this conversation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Enrique. I loved the cartoon, and I love how we have to think of inclusion not as a luxury, because if it is a luxury, every time that we are in an emergency or in an urgent situation, we're going to leave it behind. So it has to be part of the process, and it has to be like the central part of the process in order to have real democracy and real participatory processes. So thank you for this. We are approaching the very exciting moment of the breakout rooms. So I'm going to explain to you logistics about the breakout rooms, and we have received some brilliant questions from you. So you will be able to join a breakout room to hear participants answering to those questions, and also to ask more questions to create an actual discussion. But before we move to the breakout rooms, I just wanted to share some potential next steps for you that I think everyone might be interested. So the first one of them is the launch of the online courses. So right now, all the courses on inclusion are free and accessible to you. We can share the link again. You can find it on People Power's website, but we are going to share an email after with the links as well. So the online courses, you can access them on this QR code. You can go to our website, you can find them. Next thing, there's our Rising Stars mentorship program. So if you are designing or planning to design a participatory process and you need help, you can find a mentor in this program that supports you to better implement your program. And it can help you also to make an inclusive program. Another thing for you, next step, you can take the OGP, Open Government Partnership, OpenGov Challenge on gender and inclusion. So applications are open, and this is also the QR code for you to sign. Next one, you can sign on. There's a letter calling for the World Bank to include civic engagement indicator in the bank's corporate scorecard. So this is something that they are not considering now. There are many organizations and people that are advocating for this. So if you do want to sign this letter, you can use this QR code to also sign it. And I think the next step for you, we have other learning webinars. So we have one on June 18th on climate democracy, and we do have one on the beginning of July on mainstreaming participation. So you can sign up to those webinars. Again, they are being organized by People Powered, TAI, and Open Government Partnership. So you can sign up to one of those webinars if you want to join and if you have the chance. So go into the breakout room. So how this is going to work? We have 3 rooms. You can choose which one you want to go to, hear the questions that you shared, and also to ask more questions. So in the room number 1, Blair and Frank will be there. The room number 2, Elisa and Miriam. And room number 3, Enrique and I will be there to answer to your questions, okay? Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for coming to this webinar. I hope you have a really good experience now in the breakout rooms, and I also hope you have benefited from the discussions and the brilliant presentations that were shared by the panelists. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hear feedback. Thank you all. Have fun in the breakout room. See you.